Long before cities, roads, or written memory, rain was not an inconvenience. It was a force that could quietly erase the world people depended on. A few days of heavy water could drown trails, rot stored food, silence firewood, and turn familiar ground into cold, moving mud. Early humans did not control rivers. They did not build permanent walls. Many lived close to forests, caves, grasslands, and coastlines that could become dangerous without warning. Yet the strange part is this: endless rain may not have killed them as often as silence did afterward. The silence of empty hunting grounds, the silence of animals leaving flooded valleys, the silence of a fire that would not return. Archaeologists know early humans survived enormous climate swings for hundreds of thousands of years, but survival often depended on knowing when to leave a place before the land stopped forgiving them. And sometimes the safest shelter was not the place that felt safest at all. So when the rain did not stop for weeks, where did early humans actually go? Long before weather forecasts, calendars, or permanent homes, early humans learned to watch the sky with a kind of patience that modern people rarely need anymore. They did not measure storms with instruments. They measured them through sound, smell, movement, and memory. A single day of rain was not unusual. In many parts of prehistoric Africa, Europe, and Asia, seasonal rainfall shaped migration routes for both animals and humans. But endless rain was different. Endless rain changed the behavior of the land itself. The first signs were often quiet enough to ignore. Small trails disappeared beneath soft mud. Footprints no longer held their shape. Streams that were normally narrow began spreading wider across familiar ground. Dry branches became difficult to snap cleanly because moisture had already entered the wood. Even the air inside temporary shelters began to feel heavier, carrying the smell of wet earth that never completely faded. Archaeologists studying hunter-gatherer societies and ancient climate patterns believe early humans paid close attention to these changes because survival depended on noticing them before conditions became dangerous. They could not afford to wait for disaster to fully arrive. Unlike modern cities, prehistoric camps had almost no protection against prolonged rain. Animal hides absorbed moisture, bedding stayed damp, stored food spoiled faster, firewood became unreliable. A group that ignored these early warnings could slowly lose warmth, mobility, and energy without realizing how serious the situation had become. Rain also altered the behavior of animals long before humans fully understood what was happening. Herds often shifted toward higher ground or more stable grazing areas once low valleys became flooded or unstable. Birds changed flight patterns. Smaller animals disappeared into burrows or rocky shelter. For humans who depended on tracking and observation, these absences carried meaning. A silent forest could be more alarming than a loud storm. Endless rain did not simply create discomfort. It interrupted the relationship between humans and the environment they depended on every day. Some evidence from Paleolithic cave sites suggests that groups occasionally return to the same shelters during periods of harsh weather, especially locations protected by stone overhangs or elevated terrain. These places offered temporary safety from waterlogged ground and cold winds, yet reaching them was not always simple. Heavy rainfall could transform ordinary travel into slow and exhausting movement through mud, flooded grasslands, and unstable riverbanks. A journey that once took several hours might suddenly require an entire day. Early humans likely recognized these risks quickly because they lived close to the physical reality of the landscape. There was no separation between daily life and nature. If the earth changed, everything changed with it. What makes this especially important is that early humans survived through cooperation and memory rather than control. They could not stop the rain. They could only respond to it. Knowledge passed through observation became one of the most valuable forms of protection. Older members of a group may have remembered which valleys flooded first, which caves remained dry longest, or which animal paths stayed usable after weeks of rain. These memories were not written down, but they may have shaped life-saving decisions across generations. During endless rainfall, the first danger was often not drowning or violent storms. It was the slow realization that familiar land was no longer behaving normally, and once that realization arrived, movement became less of a choice and more of a necessity. As the rain continued day after day, the world early humans depended on began disappearing in small and exhausting ways. The danger was rarely sudden at first. A campsite did not instantly collapse beneath water. Instead, the ground slowly stopped behaving like solid earth. Soil that once held footprints firmly became soft enough to swallow movement. Each step required more energy. Wet grass flattened into slippery layers. Low areas collected shallow pools that reflected the grey sky above them. In colder regions, constant moisture pulled heat from the body, even without freezing temperatures. A person could become weak simply from remaining damp for too long. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer survival patterns often note how closely mobility and energy were connected. Early humans survived because they could move efficiently across landscapes. Endless rain slowly stole that efficiency away. One of the first serious problems was the disappearance of dry wood. Fire was not merely comfort. By many periods of prehistory, fire had already become central to protection, warmth, cooking, and social life. Yet, during prolonged rainfall, even forests became difficult sources of fuel. Fallen branches absorbed moisture from the ground. Bark remained slick and heavy. Small twigs that normally ignited quickly instead produced smoke or failed entirely. Some groups may have carried protected embers inside bark containers or beneath layers of ash to preserve fire between camps, because starting a completely new fire in wet conditions could become extremely difficult without dry material. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric hearths suggests humans often reused established fire locations repeatedly, especially in sheltered areas where stone surfaces stayed drier than open ground. This relationship with fire became even more fragile during endless rain because maintaining warmth required constant attention. A single extinguished fire could change an entire night. Rain also erased another invisible system humans relied upon: tracks. Long before roads or written maps, animal trails guided movement through forests, plains, and river valleys. Early hunters learned to read crushed grass, broken branches, hoof marks, and disturbed soil. These signs revealed where animals traveled, drank, rested, or migrated. But heavy rainfall washed many of these details away. Mud blurred shapes into shapeless impressions. Flowing water erased footprints completely. Familiar paths became uncertain. A hunting group moving through soaked land could no longer trust yesterday's signs. Endless rain therefore threatened food security, not only because animals moved elsewhere, but because humans lost the ability to follow them clearly. This mattered deeply because prehistoric humans were highly dependent on environmental memory. They understood land through repeated observation over years and generations. When rain transformed rivers, trails, and vegetation, the landscape itself became harder to recognize. Small streams widened into barriers, open ground turned marshy. Certain valleys became dangerous to cross. Research into Ice Age and Paleolithic migration patterns suggests that humans often preferred terrain that balanced access to water with access to stable shelter and predictable animal movement. Endless rain disrupted all three at once. Safe sleeping places became difficult to maintain because moisture entered bedding and hides faster than they could dry. Food gathering slowed because searching for edible plants in soaked terrain required more time and energy. Even sound changed during long storms. Constant rainfall masked distant movement, making it harder to hear animals or approaching danger. The world became visually blurred and acoustically uncertain. Yet perhaps the most important change was psychological. Early humans likely understood that nature operated through cycles. Dry seasons returned, rivers lowered again, animals migrated back. But when rain continued beyond expectation, uncertainty itself became exhausting. The familiar rhythm of survival disappeared. A group could no longer confidently predict which ground would remain safe tomorrow, or where dry shelter might still exist several days ahead. And slowly, almost without warning, people may have realized that the place they knew best was becoming impossible to live in. Long before floodwater reached a shelter, or riverbanks finally collapsed, endless rain had already begun changing the emotional atmosphere inside a human group. Fear did not always arrive through dramatic disasters. Often it arrived quietly, through repetition. The same grey sky each morning, the same wet smell trapped inside animal hides, the same sound of water striking stone, leaves, and earth without pause. Modern humans can usually escape weather by entering heated buildings, turning on lights, or waiting indoors with stored food nearby. Early humans had no such separation from the environment around them. Rain was not something happening outside their lives. It was happening directly inside every part of survival. Archaeologists and climate researchers studying prehistoric environments understand that ancient humans were deeply sensitive to environmental stability because their daily existence depended on predicting the land correctly. Endless rain created uncertainty long before visible catastrophe appeared. One reason prolonged rainfall became frightening was because humans likely recognized patterns in nature very carefully. Hunter-gatherer groups survived through observation repeated across generations. They knew where water usually flowed after storms. They remembered which valleys dried quickly and which remained dangerous. They noticed when birds returned, when herds migrated, and when certain plants became available again. A storm that lasted beyond those remembered patterns may have carried a different emotional weight. It suggested the environment was behaving outside familiar cycles. That uncertainty alone could become dangerous because hesitation wastes energy. Moving too early carried risk. Waiting too long carried another. Endless rain forced decisions without clear answers. The human body itself also reacts differently during long periods of cold moisture and limited sunlight. Even without understanding biology scientifically, early humans would have experienced the physical exhaustion created by damp conditions. Wet clothing made from hides or plant fibers lost insulating ability. Sleeping on moist ground reduced body warmth night after night. Smoke from struggling fires irritated eyes and lungs. Inside enclosed shelters, small injuries healed more slowly in constantly wet environments. Research on prehistoric health suggests respiratory infections and physical stress were likely significant dangers in difficult climates, especially for children and older adults. Rain, therefore, represented more than inconvenience. It slowly weakened a group's physical resilience while simultaneously demanding more energy to survive. Yet the fear of endless rain was also connected to memory. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We become calm when the world behaves predictably. Early humans may not have described anxiety in modern language, but they almost certainly felt the tension created when familiar signs disappeared. Animal movement became inconsistent. Dry resting places became rare. River sounds grew louder at night. Even darkness itself changed because thick storm clouds reduced daylight for long periods. Time became harder to sense clearly. A group living through continuous rainfall may have felt trapped inside a landscape that no longer gave reliable information. Some anthropologists believe this sensitivity to environmental unpredictability shaped many early human behaviors related to cooperation, migration, and shelter selection. During endless rain, survival depended not only on strength, but on the ability to remain attentive without panic. That balance would have been difficult to maintain, especially for small groups already tired from hunger or movement. Importantly, prehistoric humans did not know when the rain would end. Modern people can look at forecasts, maps, and climate data. Early humans only had memory and observation. Each additional day of rainfall carried uncertainty into the next morning. The danger was not simply water itself. It was the growing realization that the land might continue changing faster than humans could adapt to it. Before floods destroyed camps, before rivers became impossible to cross, endless rain had already done something quieter. It had interrupted the sense of familiarity between humans and the world they depended on. And once that familiarity weakened, even ordinary ground could begin to feel unsafe. For early humans, leaving a familiar place was never a small decision. Movement required energy, coordination, memory, and risk. A group that abandoned a known shelter could lose access to water sources, hunting routes, edible plants, or safe sleeping areas they had learned over many seasons. Yet during endless rain, remaining still could slowly become even more dangerous than walking into uncertainty. This was one of the harshest realities prehistoric humans likely faced. Safety was temporary. A location that protected life one week could begin destroying it the next. Archaeological studies of hunter-gatherer mobility suggest that early humans constantly balanced stability with flexibility. They rarely stayed in one place forever, especially before agriculture and permanent settlements became common. Seasonal movement already existed in many prehistoric societies because animal migration, climate shifts, and food availability changed throughout the year. Endless rain intensified this pattern by accelerating environmental instability. The problem was not simply flooding, it was the gradual collapse of everyday survival systems inside a camp. Ground became colder and wetter each night. Water collected beneath sleeping areas. Parasites and insects may have increased in stagnant conditions. Firewood became harder to gather nearby because usable branches had already been collected or soaked through. Food resources closest to camp were depleted faster because travel distances became exhausting. Slowly, the energy required to maintain a camp exceeded the energy gained from staying there. At that point, movement became necessary even if conditions outside were difficult. Early humans likely recognized an important truth that modern people rarely confront directly. Familiarity can become dangerous when environments change. A valley remembered as safe might suddenly trap water after continuous rainfall. A forest path used for generations could turn into deep mud or unstable ground. Research into Paleolithic habitation patterns shows that prehistoric humans often selected camps near rivers, lakes, or seasonal water sources because these areas attracted animals and supported plant life. But during endless rain, the same places became vulnerable first. Water expanded outward into spaces humans normally occupied. Low shelters became damp, riverbanks softened and collapsed. Crossing points disappeared beneath stronger currents. Staying too long near these areas could isolate a group from escape routes entirely. There was also a psychological difficulty connected to leaving. Humans form attachments to familiar landscapes. Even prehistoric people likely associated certain shelters, caves, or hunting grounds with safety because repeated survival there built trust over time. Endless rain challenged that trust slowly rather than instantly. A camp might still appear usable while conditions underneath it worsened day by day. This gradual change made decision-making more complicated. Leave too early, and a group wasted valuable energy. Leave too late, and weakened members might no longer survive the journey. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have observed how mobility often depends on collective judgment rather than individual choice. Decisions about movement affect children, elders, stored tools, food remains, and protected fire embers. During prolonged rainfall, the entire group would have needed to evaluate not only where danger existed, but whether another location could realistically offer something better. Sometimes there may have been no truly safe option at all, only less dangerous ones. Endless rain transformed movement into a form of survival strategy rather than exploration. Humans were no longer traveling to seek abundance. They were moving to avoid slow deterioration. This difference matters because it changes the emotional meaning of migration itself. Travel during favorable seasons can feel purposeful. Travel during environmental instability feels uncertain and exhausting. Yet prehistoric humans survived precisely because they retained the ability to move when the land demanded it. Their strength did not come from controlling nature. It came from recognizing when attachment to one place had become more dangerous than the unknown waiting somewhere beyond the rain. As endless rain continued across valleys and forests, early humans were forced to change not only where they lived, but also how they moved through the world itself. Migration routes that may have been used repeatedly across seasons could suddenly become unreliable. A landscape remembered through years of experience no longer responded in familiar ways. Water expanded into places that were normally dry. Forest floors softened beneath constant moisture. Narrow animal trails disappeared beneath mud and fallen debris. For prehistoric humans who depended entirely on movement across natural terrain, this transformation created a serious survival problem. Archaeological and environmental studies suggest that hunter-gatherer groups often traveled along routes shaped by water access, predictable animal movement, shelter locations, and terrain that allowed efficient travel. Endless rain disrupted all of these at once. Valleys were among the first places to change dramatically. Under normal conditions, valleys offered important advantages. They collected water, supported vegetation, attracted grazing animals, and often provided easier travel than steep, elevated terrain. Many prehistoric campsites discovered by archaeologists are located near rivers or lowland environments for these reasons. But during prolonged rainfall, valleys could slowly become traps. Streams widened into unstable channels. Soil absorbed more water than it could hold. Open ground transformed into marshy terrain that exhausted movement with every step. Floodplains that once supported life became dangerous to cross, especially for groups carrying children, tools, animal hides, or preserved embers from fires. Endless rain therefore forced humans to reconsider terrain they may once have trusted completely. Forests changed as well, though often in quieter ways. Dense wooded areas could provide some protection from wind, but they also trapped moisture beneath the canopy. Fallen leaves became slick and heavy. Rot spread faster through wood. Visibility decreased in constant rainfall and dim light. Large animals moved differently through soaked forests, sometimes avoiding low areas altogether. Hunting inside these conditions became slower and more uncertain because sound traveled strangely through wet vegetation. Rain masked movement, branches dripped continuously. Human footsteps became quieter, but so did the approach of predators or unfamiliar groups. Researchers studying prehistoric hunting behavior believe humans relied heavily on reading terrain visually and acoustically. Endless rain interfered with both. Movement through forests therefore demanded more caution and more energy at the exact moment groups were already becoming physically exhausted. Some evidence suggests early humans may have shifted toward elevated terrain during severe environmental instability. Rocky ridges, cliffs, and higher ground drained water more effectively than valleys. These areas could provide better visibility and drier shelter opportunities beneath stone overhangs, yet higher terrain carried its own difficulties. Food resources were often less predictable there. Exposure to wind increased body heat loss. Travel over steep ground required greater physical effort, especially for older individuals or children. Endless rain did not offer perfect choices. It forced constant compromise between safety, mobility, warmth, and access to food. This may explain why prehistoric migration was often flexible rather than fixed. Humans adapted route decisions according to changing conditions rather than following rigid paths. Animal movement likely influenced these decisions heavily. Herds escaping flooded lowlands may have created temporary migration corridors that humans followed cautiously. In this way, early humans were not simply wandering through storms, they were continuously reading environmental signals, searching for terrain that remained survivable. What makes this especially striking is how temporary these solutions probably felt. A dry ridge could become dangerous after several more days of rain. A narrow crossing might disappear overnight. Endless rainfall created a world where routes were never fully secure for long. Humans survived not because they found permanent safety, but because they remained capable of adjusting movement before familiar paths failed completely. In many ways, the rain was not only reshaping the land, it was reshaping the map inside the human mind. For early humans, abandoning a temporary camp was rarely a dramatic moment. There may have been no final speech, no clear signal that survival in that place had ended. More often, the decision probably emerged slowly through accumulated discomfort and growing uncertainty. A sleeping area remained wet for too many nights. Nearby animal tracks disappeared completely. Firewood had to be gathered farther away each day. The ground smelled increasingly sour from standing water and decaying vegetation. People woke cold even after sleeping close together. Endless rain forced humans into a difficult realization. The shelter protecting them yesterday might already be failing them today. Archaeologists, studying prehistoric campsites, often find evidence that many early human shelters were temporary by design. Hunter-gatherer groups commonly used caves, rock overhangs, open-air camps, or simple structures made from branches, hides, and plant material. These shelters worked because humans remained mobile, but during prolonged rainfall, mobility itself became exhausting. This created a painful tension. Remaining in one place drained resources slowly, yet leaving demanded energy that weakened groups could barely spare. The decision to move, therefore, carried emotional and physical weight at the same time. A camp represented familiarity. People knew where water could normally be collected, where children slept safest, where tools had been stored, and where fire had previously survived strong wind or cold nights. Even temporary places accumulate memory quickly when survival depends on them. Endless rain gradually stripped that feeling of reliability away. One of the hardest realities about abandoning camp was the uncertainty waiting beyond it. Early humans could not consult maps or forecasts. They moved through landscapes remembered through experience, observation, and shared knowledge. During heavy rainfall, even familiar routes became unstable. A river crossing used many times before could now be dangerous. A cave that once remained dry might already shelter another group or become inaccessible due to flooding nearby. Leaving camp meant accepting that the next shelter might not be better at all. Anthropologists who study nomadic survival patterns often note that movement decisions are deeply connected to group cooperation. Every member traveled at a different pace. Children tired easily in wet conditions. Older adults carried knowledge, but may have struggled physically during long movement through mud and cold terrain. Valuable items such as stone tools, animal hides, gathered food, and protected embers all needed attention during migration. Endless rain increased the risk of losing these essentials along the way. A weakened fire alone could threaten the next several nights. This meant abandoning camp was not simply walking away from a location. It was reorganizing the entire structure of survival while already under physical stress. There is also evidence suggesting prehistoric humans sometimes revisited the same shelter areas repeatedly across generations. especially caves or elevated sites with dependable protection. Because of this, leaving a place may have carried emotional meaning beyond immediate survival. Humans form attachment not only to people, but to landscapes associated with safety and memory. A familiar shelter during rain could feel psychologically protective even after conditions worsened physically. Endless rainfall, therefore, created a dangerous temptation to stay slightly too long. The decline was gradual enough to encourage hesitation, yet nature rarely waited for certainty. Water continued rising, resources continued shrinking, paths continued disappearing. At some point, the decision was no longer truly between staying and leaving. It became a question of whether the group still possessed enough strength left to move at all. This may be one reason mobility became such an important human advantage across prehistory. Early humans survived not because they always found safe places, but because they recognized when a place had stopped being survivable. During endless rain, abandoning camp was not failure, it was adaptation, a quiet acknowledgement that survival sometimes required releasing the ground beneath you before it fully disappeared. When endless rain covered forests, valleys, and open camps with cold moisture, caves became more than geological formations. They became rare interruptions in an unstable world. For early humans, dry space was not guaranteed. Most daily life happened directly beneath changing weather conditions, exposed to wind, darkness, and shifting temperatures. During prolonged rainfall, even small areas protected from water could dramatically improve a group's chances of survival. Archaeological evidence from many prehistoric regions shows that humans repeatedly used caves and rock shelters across thousands of years, especially during difficult environmental periods. These places offered something that temporary surface shelters often could not provide: a more stable relationship with the environment outside. The importance of caves during long wet periods began with something simple but essential. Stone does not absorb rain the way soil, wood, or animal hides do. A cave floor positioned above flooding levels could remain relatively dry, even after weeks of heavy weather. This mattered enormously because constant moisture weakens the human body slowly. Wet sleeping areas increase heat loss, damp materials decay faster, fire becomes difficult to sustain. Endless rain transformed dryness itself into a valuable resource. Inside caves, humans could sometimes preserve fire longer, protect tools from continuous exposure, and rest without direct rainfall, striking their bodies throughout the night. Researchers studying prehistoric hearths have found repeated evidence of fire use deep within cave systems, suggesting humans intentionally selected protected interior spaces where flames could survive changing weather more reliably. Caves also reduced another exhausting burden created by endless rain: exposure. Open camps demanded constant maintenance, branch shelters sagged under water weight, animal hides became heavy and cold, wind pushed rain sideways into sleeping areas. In contrast, rock shelters provided physical barriers that required less rebuilding during storms. For groups already weakened by movement, hunger, or cold conditions, conserving energy became critical. A cave may not have been comfortable, but it allowed humans to spend fewer resources defending themselves from the weather every hour of the day. During severe rain, survival often depended on reducing energy loss rather than increasing comfort, yet caves offered more than physical protection alone. They also changed sound, light, and emotional atmosphere. Outside, endless rain filled the environment with movement and uncertainty. Water struck leaves, mud shifted beneath footsteps, rivers grew louder, and visibility narrowed beneath storm clouds. Inside a cave, some of those signals softened. Firelight reflected against stone walls instead of disappearing into darkness. Voices remained close. Sleeping groups gathered nearer together. Anthropologists believe social closeness played a major role in prehistoric survival because cooperation reduced vulnerability during environmental stress. A protected interior space may therefore have provided psychological stability as well as physical shelter. For a short time, the outside world became less immediate. However, caves were never perfect sanctuaries. Many were cold, narrow, smoky, or already occupied by animals. Some archaeological evidence suggests humans shared cave environments at different times with predators such as bears, hyenas, or large cats. Entering an unfamiliar cave carried risk because darkness concealed hazards, difficult to detect without reliable light. Ventilation also mattered. Fires inside enclosed spaces could fill the air with smoke, irritating lungs and eyes over long periods. Endless rain forced humans toward these shelters not because caves were ideal, but because they were often less dangerous than remaining exposed outside. Importantly, caves were unevenly distributed across landscapes. Many regions simply lacked them. This meant groups traveling through endless rain may have constantly searched for natural overhangs, elevated rock formations, or shallow stone recesses, offering even partial protection. Shelter became something temporary and precious rather than permanent. The rain did not stop simply because humans reached stone walls. But inside those darker spaces, early humans may have found brief moments where the world felt predictable again, even while storms continued beyond the cave entrance. Although caves offered protection from endless rain, they also carried limits and dangers that early humans could never fully ignore. Modern imagination often treats caves as naturally safe shelters, but prehistoric reality was more complicated. A cave could protect a group from wind and moisture while introducing entirely different threats at the same time. Survival during long wet periods was therefore not about finding perfect refuge. It was about choosing environments where the risks were slightly more manageable than the conditions outside. Archaeological evidence suggests humans used caves repeatedly across different prehistoric eras, yet many cave occupations appear temporary rather than permanent. This may partly reflect the difficult balance between safety and discomfort inside enclosed stone spaces. One major problem was cold. Stone surfaces absorb and hold lower temperatures for long periods, especially in damp climates. Even when rain remained outside, cave interiors could feel chillingly cool against the body. Sleeping directly on rock or moist earth slowly pulled away body heat throughout the night. Early humans likely used animal hides, grasses, or plant material to reduce contact with cold ground. But during endless rain, these materials themselves often became damp over time. A cave could keep people dry from falling water while still leaving them cold. Over many nights, this constant exposure may have weakened already exhausted groups. Smoke created another serious challenge. Fire was essential inside caves for warmth, cooking, protection, and light. Yet enclosed spaces trapped smoke easily, especially deeper inside narrow chambers with poor airflow. Archaeologists studying prehistoric cave hearths often find layers of soot and ash accumulation that suggest repeated fire use over long periods. While fire improved survival, the smoke produced by wet wood likely irritated lungs and eyes continuously. Endless rain made this worse because dry fuel became harder to find outside. Damp branches produced thicker smoke and weaker flames. Humans sheltering inside caves during long storms may have spent hours breathing heavy, smoky air simply to avoid colder conditions outside. The very thing preserving warmth could slowly damage comfort and health at the same time. Darkness also shaped cave life in ways modern people rarely experience. Beyond the reach of firelight, caves quickly became difficult to navigate safely. Uneven stone surfaces, hidden drops, narrow passages, and unstable rock created physical dangers, especially for children or tired individuals moving during the night. Early humans probably stayed close to cave entrances whenever possible, because these areas balanced shelter with access to daylight and visibility outside. Deep cave systems may have felt psychologically unsettling as well. Humans evolved in environments where awareness of surroundings mattered constantly. Darkness limited that awareness. Sounds echoed strangely through stone chambers, making it difficult to judge distance or movement accurately. Endless rain already filled the outside world with uncertainty. Caves sometimes concentrated that uncertainty into enclosed darkness instead. Another danger came from other animals. Many cave systems were not empty spaces waiting for human arrival. Paleontological evidence shows that bears, hyenas, lions, and other predators also used caves for shelter during different periods. Humans entering unfamiliar caves had no guarantee they were unoccupied. Even abandoned caves carried traces of previous animal use, including waste, parasites, or decaying remains. During endless rainfall, competition for dry shelter may have increased among both humans and animals seeking protection from the same environment. Some caves were also vulnerable to water itself. Heavy storms could send runoff flowing into lower chambers unexpectedly. Cave floors sometimes flooded gradually after prolonged rains saturated surrounding ground. A shelter that seemed safe during the afternoon could become dangerous overnight. Early humans likely learned to recognize signs of safer cave placement, preferring elevated entrances or stone overhangs, less exposed to direct water flow. Yet no natural shelter was entirely predictable during severe weather. This may be the most important truth about cave life during endless rain. Caves reduced certain dangers, but they never removed vulnerability completely. Humans survived there not because caves were comfortable or secure in every way, but because prehistoric survival often depended on enduring imperfect protection while remaining ready to move again if conditions changed. Even behind stone walls, the rain still shaped every decision. Not every landscape offered caves during endless rain, and even when caves existed, they were not always reachable or safe. Because of this, early humans often depended on smaller forms of natural shelter scattered across the land. Rock overhangs, cliff edges, elevated ridges, and naturally raised ground may have become extremely valuable during long wet periods. These places rarely provided complete protection from weather, yet they changed one important detail: water moved differently there. In prehistoric survival, small differences in drainage, elevation, and exposure could determine whether a group stayed warm enough to recover through the night or slowly weakened day after day. Archaeological evidence from many regions suggests humans repeatedly occupied shallow rock shelters and elevated terrain long before permanent structures existed. These locations may have represented practical compromises between mobility and protection. A rock overhang could block direct rainfall while remaining more open and accessible than a deep cave. Unlike enclosed cave systems, shallow shelters often allowed better airflow and easier observation of surrounding terrain. During endless rain, visibility mattered. Humans needed to monitor animal movement, changing water levels, and possible dangers approaching through unstable landscapes. A shelter that protected against rain while preserving awareness of the outside world may have felt safer than complete darkness behind stone walls. Cliffs and higher rocky ground also offered another advantage that became increasingly important during prolonged storms: drainage. Water naturally flowed downward into valleys, depressions, and river systems. Elevated terrain, therefore, remained firmer underfoot for longer periods. Endless rain transformed soft, lowland ground into thick mud that exhausted movement and trapped moisture close to the body. Higher terrain reduced some of that exposure. Even a slightly raised sleeping area could remain noticeably drier than surrounding land. Early humans likely learned through repeated experience which slopes shed water efficiently and which surfaces remained dangerously slick after storms. This knowledge may have been passed quietly through observation rather than formal teaching, shaping movement patterns across generations. Yet these shelters came with trade-offs. High ground was often colder and more exposed to wind. Rain driven sideways by storms could still enter shallow rock shelters easily. Lightning and falling rock may also have posed dangers in mountainous regions during severe weather. Endless rain forced humans into environments where no option was fully comfortable. A cliff overhang might preserve dryness while reducing warmth. A sheltered ridge might offer visibility but limit nearby food resources. During long storms, survival depended on continuously balancing these competing needs rather than solving them permanently. Anthropologists studying mobile hunter-gatherer groups often emphasize how closely human movement follows energy efficiency. Endless rain disrupted this balance constantly. Climbing toward elevated shelter required strength at the exact moment people were already tired, cold, and carrying possessions or children through difficult terrain. Nevertheless, many groups may have accepted this cost because remaining near flooded lowlands became increasingly dangerous over time. Some prehistoric sites discovered on elevated ground suggest humans intentionally selected terrain that reduced flood risk while maintaining access to nearby resources. This does not mean early humans fully controlled their environments. Instead, they became skilled at noticing subtle advantages hidden within unstable landscapes. Rock formations may also have carried emotional importance during endless rain. In a world where forests shifted, rivers widened, and camps dissolved into mud, stone represented something comparatively stable. Cliffs did not soften under rain the way Earth did. Elevated ridges remained visible even beneath grey skies. During periods when familiar pathways disappeared, solid rock may have offered a rare sense of permanence, but even these places were temporary refuges. Rain still reached them. Cold still entered the body at night. Food still needed to be found beyond the shelter itself. Early humans survived not because they escaped the storm entirely, but because they kept finding pieces of land where survival remained possible for a little while longer. Sometimes that survival depended on nothing more than a narrow strip of dry stone above the rain-soaked world below. During endless rain, early humans may have trusted animals more than the landscape itself. Rivers changed too quickly, trails vanished beneath mud, forests became quiet in unfamiliar ways. But animals continued responding to the environment hour by hour, often sensing danger before humans fully understood it. For prehistoric people living without maps, forecasts, or permanent settlements, observing animal movement was not only about hunting, it was a method of reading the condition of the world around them. Archaeologists and anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies often describe how deeply human survival depended on environmental awareness. Early humans watched animals because animals revealed information hidden inside, changing weather, shifting terrain, and unstable ecosystems. Endless rain made this relationship even more important. One reason animals became valuable indicators during long storms is that they reacted directly to changes in water, vegetation, and ground stability. Herd animals rarely remained in flooded grazing areas if food quality declined. Smaller mammals abandoned burrows that filled with water. Birds altered flight routes and nesting behavior when storms persisted beyond normal seasonal patterns. Predators followed prey movement into new territory. Humans, who paid attention to these changes, gained clues about which regions remained survivable and which were deteriorating. Long before scientific meteorology existed, observation itself became a form of practical intelligence. Early humans may not have understood rainfall through atmospheric science, but they understood patterns of movement. When familiar animals disappeared from valleys or forests, something in the environment had changed. Endless rain also made direct human exploration more dangerous and exhausting. Searching blindly for safe routes through soaked terrain wasted precious energy. Animals sometimes solved part of this problem unintentionally. Herds moving toward higher ground or firmer terrain created natural pathways through difficult environments. Repeated animal movement pressed vegetation down, revealing more stable routes across muddy land. Humans likely noticed these patterns because survival depended on efficient movement. Anthropological research into tracking traditions shows that prehistoric hunters developed extraordinary sensitivity to footprints, broken branches, disturbed soil, and subtle behavioral changes in animals. During prolonged rainfall, this skill became even more valuable because visual landmarks were often obscured by weather and flooding. In some ways, animals functioned as moving environmental signals guiding human decisions indirectly. Yet following animals during endless rain was never simple. Heavy storms disrupted tracks quickly. Water erased footprints and washed away scent trails. Visibility declined beneath grey skies and dense wet vegetation. Hunting itself became less predictable because animals behaved differently under environmental stress. Some species scattered into smaller groups. Others migrated suddenly over long distances. Humans, therefore, faced a difficult balance between pursuing animals for food and using animal behavior merely as information about safer terrain. Endless rain forced people to observe more carefully while acting more cautiously. Researchers studying prehistoric subsistence patterns believe flexibility was one of humanity's greatest survival strengths. Humans adapted not by dominating ecosystems completely, but by responding intelligently to changes within them. Watching animals reflected this adaptability. Importantly, early humans did not separate themselves from nature in the way many modern societies do. They lived inside the same environmental pressures affecting every other creature around them. Cold weakened both humans and animals. Flooding displaced both. Scarcity shaped movement for all living things sharing the landscape. Endless rain, therefore, created a strange form of silent communication across species. Humans watched where animals avoided sleeping. They noticed which paths remained active after days of storms. They recognized when forests suddenly emptied of movement. These observations may have carried emotional weight as well. A landscape without familiar animal sounds could feel deeply unsettling because it suggested instability larger than any single storm. During long periods of rain, animals became more than prey. They became evidence of whether life itself could still continue safely in a place. And when those animals kept moving away from flooded ground, humans often understood the message clearly enough to follow. As endless rain spread across valleys and grasslands, one of the clearest signs that the environment was changing came from the movement of large animal herds. Long before prehistoric humans built permanent roads or settlements, migrating animals already shaped the rhythm of survival. Herds of grazing mammals moved according to water, vegetation, temperature, and ground conditions. Early humans followed these patterns closely because animals were not only sources of food, they were moving indicators of where the land still remained livable. During prolonged rainfall, herd migration may have become one of the most important clues guiding human movement through unstable landscapes. Archaeological and environmental research suggests many prehistoric hunting groups organized parts of their seasonal travel around predictable animal routes, but endless rain disrupted these familiar cycles. Flooded lowlands changed plant growth. Soft ground slowed grazing animals and increased the risk of injury. Waterlogged valleys trapped moisture that spoiled edible vegetation or reduced its nutritional value. Herds therefore began shifting toward terrain where footing remained firmer and food more reliable. Often this meant gradual movement toward elevated plains, rocky slopes, or areas with better drainage. Humans, observing these migrations, would have understood something important immediately. If the animals were leaving, remaining behind could become dangerous. Following herds during endless rain was not simply about maintaining access to meat. Large animals often located survivable terrain more efficiently than humans could during harsh conditions. Herds naturally avoided areas where movement became exhausting or unstable. They searched for ground that allowed grazing, resting, and escape from predators. In many ways, animals continuously tested the landscape through their own behavior. Humans watching from a distance may have interpreted these movements as environmental information as much as hunting opportunity. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer adaptation often emphasize that prehistoric humans survived partly because they observed ecosystems rather than attempting to overpower them directly. Endless rain strengthened this dependence on observation. Yet herd migration also created difficult new pressures. When animals moved, humans had to decide whether they possessed enough energy to follow. Prolonged rainfall already weakened groups physically through cold, dampness, and food uncertainty. Traveling behind migrating animals across muddy terrain demanded endurance at exactly the wrong moment. Some herds may have moved faster than exhausted humans could manage, especially groups carrying children, injured members, or valuable tools. Endless rain therefore created a dangerous possibility. Humans might lose contact with the animal movement patterns they depended on for survival. Once that connection weakened, hunger became more likely. Rain also made tracking migration more difficult than during dry seasons. Hoofprints filled with water quickly. Soft ground distorted movement patterns. Rivers that animals previously crossed safely became stronger barriers during storms. Visibility declined beneath grey skies and wet vegetation. Humans could no longer rely entirely on old routes because herds themselves were adapting to unfamiliar environmental conditions. This may explain why flexibility became such a critical survival trait in prehistoric life. Early humans likely succeeded not because they followed fixed migration systems perfectly, but because they adjusted constantly as conditions changed around them. Endless rain transformed migration into an ongoing negotiation between weather, animals, terrain, and human endurance. There may also have been emotional consequences to watching herds disappear into distant terrain. Animal movement shaped daily human expectation across generations. Familiar sounds, tracks, and grazing patterns helped define whether a landscape felt alive and reliable. When large herds abandoned flooded regions, the silence left behind may have carried psychological weight beyond hunger alone. A valley, emptied of movement, no longer felt stable. It suggested the environment itself was withdrawing support for life there. During long storms, humans may have understood this deeply even without scientific language. The animals were not merely leaving because of rain. They were leaving because the land had begun changing into something less survivable, and for humans standing inside that same changing world, following them often became the only reasonable choice. Endless rain did not only change where early humans traveled, it changed how they searched for food, how often hunts succeeded, and how secure survival felt from one day to the next. For prehistoric people, food security was never permanent, even during stable seasons. Hunting depended on timing, cooperation, environmental knowledge, and physical endurance. Prolonged rainfall disrupted each of these quietly but continuously. The result was not always immediate starvation. More often, it was a slow increase in uncertainty. A hunt that normally succeeded after several hours might suddenly fail for days in a row. A familiar feeding ground could become empty without warning. Over time, endless rain transformed food gathering from a predictable rhythm into a constant negotiation with unstable conditions. One major problem involved tracking. Early humans relied heavily on reading signs left behind by animals, footprints pressed into soil, broken vegetation, disturbed earth, droppings, and movement patterns across terrain. Heavy rain erased many of these details quickly. Mud filled with water until tracks lost shape. Flowing runoff washed away scent trails and smaller signs completely. Hunters moving through soaked landscapes, therefore, had less reliable information about where animals had traveled recently. Endless rain did not make animals disappear entirely, but it made them harder to follow with confidence. Anthropologists studying traditional tracking skills often describe how much precision is required to interpret environmental clues accurately. During prolonged storms, that precision became harder to maintain. Rain also changed the behavior of animals themselves. Large grazing species moved unpredictably as flooded terrain altered access to vegetation. Smaller animals remained hidden longer inside burrows or dense cover. Predators followed prey into unfamiliar regions. Hunting routes remembered through generations no longer guaranteed success because the ecosystem itself was reorganizing around changing weather patterns. Humans therefore faced a difficult challenge. They needed to move more carefully through dangerous terrain while simultaneously expanding the range of places they searched for food. This demanded energy that constant dampness and cold were already draining away from the body. In many prehistoric environments, rain likely increased the physical cost of obtaining every meal. Endless rain may also have affected gathering practices alongside hunting. Edible plants became harder to preserve in wet conditions. Roots and seeds hidden beneath saturated ground required greater effort to collect. Mold and rot spread faster in constant moisture. Archaeological research into hunter-gatherer diets suggests early humans depended on flexible combinations of meat, gathered plants, nuts, fruits, shellfish, and smaller animals depending on season and geography. Prolonged rain threatened this flexibility because it disrupted multiple food sources simultaneously. A failed hunt became more dangerous if stored plant foods were already spoiled or inaccessible. This growing instability likely shaped social behavior inside groups as well. Food sharing became increasingly important during uncertain hunting periods. Anthropologists widely believe cooperation played a central role in human survival because sharing resources reduced individual vulnerability when food became unpredictable. Endless rain may have strengthened this dependence on collective survival strategies. A successful hunt during prolonged storms carried greater importance because several previous attempts may have failed already. Small groups surviving together could endure uncertainty longer than isolated individuals, yet tension may also have increased quietly when resources became scarce. Rain created a world where energy disappeared faster than it could easily be replaced. What makes this especially important is that early humans probably understood these risks gradually rather than all at once. The fear came from inconsistency. Animal movement no longer followed familiar timing. Food sources appeared less reliable each week. The environment stopped providing clear answers. Endless rain, therefore, attacked something deeper than hunger alone. It weakened predictability. And for humans living entirely inside natural cycles, predictability was one of the most valuable forms of safety they possessed. When rain began dismantling those patterns, survival became less about skillful hunting and more about enduring uncertainty long enough to adapt to a changing world. During endless rain, fire became something fragile. Modern people often think of fire as simple, immediate, and replaceable. A match fails, and another can be struck seconds later. But for early humans, maintaining fire may have required continuous effort, especially in wet environments where dry fuel nearly disappeared. Archaeological evidence strongly suggests that by many periods of prehistory, humans already depended deeply on controlled fire for warmth, cooking, protection, tool-making, and social life. Endless rain threatened all of these at once by attacking the conditions fire needed to survive. In many ways, the struggle to keep flames alive became a daily battle against moisture itself. The difficulty began with fuel. Dry wood does not remain dry for long during prolonged storms. Fallen branches absorb water from soaked ground. Bark becomes slick and heavy. Small twigs that normally ignite easily instead produce smoke, weak flames, or no flame at all. Even grass and leaves suitable for kindling lose usefulness after repeated rainfall. Early humans likely searched constantly for partially protected fuel beneath rock overhangs, inside hollow trees, or under dense vegetation where moisture accumulated more slowly. Yet endless rain reduced these dry reserves day after day. The farther humans traveled from camp searching for usable material, the more energy they spent simply maintaining warmth for the next night. Researchers studying prehistoric fire use believe humans often preferred preserving existing embers rather than repeatedly creating new fires from nothing, especially in harsh weather conditions. This may explain why fire itself became something carried, protected, and monitored carefully during movement. Endless rain also changed the behavior of flames directly. Damp wood burned unevenly and generated thick smoke. Fires required more attention to prevent them from collapsing into weak embers. Wind combined with rain could extinguish exposed flames rapidly. Temporary shelters made from branches or hides often leaked moisture steadily into fire areas. Even caves and rock shelters, while more protective, sometimes trapped smoke so heavily that maintaining indoor fires became physically exhausting. Early humans may have spent long hours adjusting fuel placement, shielding flames from dripping water, and preserving small pockets of heat inside otherwise wet environments. The fire was rarely left alone because losing it carried serious consequences. Without reliable fire, nights became colder immediately. Wet clothing and damp sleeping surfaces increased body heat loss during rest. Cooked food became harder to prepare safely. Smoke and flames that normally discouraged predators disappeared from camp edges. Light vanished earlier each evening, shrinking the area humans could safely occupy after dark. Anthropologists widely believe fire played a major role in strengthening social cooperation because it created shared protected space during nighttime hours. Endless rain threatened this shared center of human life continuously. A struggling fire meant more than discomfort. It weakened the emotional and physical stability of the group itself. There is evidence suggesting prehistoric humans developed methods for transporting embers across distances, possibly using bark containers, ash insulation, or slow-burning materials that retained heat for long periods. During endless rainfall, such techniques may have become critically important. Starting entirely new fires in soaked conditions could be extremely difficult, depending on available materials and environmental exposure. Protecting existing embers, therefore, became a form of survival planning. A small, glowing core hidden beneath ash might represent the difference between warmth and dangerous cold several hours later. What makes this struggle especially revealing is how much human survival depended on constant maintenance rather than dramatic action. Endless rain did not usually destroy fire through one catastrophic moment. Instead, moisture slowly weakened it, hour after hour. Wood burned less efficiently, smoke thickened, fuel reserves disappeared, attention became exhausted. The danger came through persistence. Early humans survived partly because they learned to guard fragile systems continuously, even when tired, hungry, and uncertain. During long storms, fire represented one of those fragile systems. It was not permanent safety. It was temporary stability carefully protected against a world that remained wet, cold, and endlessly changing beyond the edge of the flames. Endless rain changed the experience of night for early humans more than perhaps any other part of daily life. During dry seasons, firelight, animal hides, and carefully chosen sleeping areas could provide enough warmth for rest and recovery. But when rain continued for days or weeks without pause, the simple act of sleeping became physically difficult. Moisture entered nearly everything. Wood burned poorly. Smoke thickened inside shelters. Ground that once felt firm and dry slowly absorbed cold water beneath the body. Archaeological research into prehistoric habitation suggests that early humans invested significant effort into controlling exposure to cold and dampness, because even small changes in body temperature affect energy, movement, and health. Endless rain attacked these protections gradually until rest itself became less restorative. Wet fuel was one of the central problems. Freshly gathered branches no longer cracked sharply when broken. Instead, they bent heavily or released moisture immediately when placed near flame. Fires built from damp material often produced weak heat and large amounts of smoke. The flames flickered inconsistently, forcing people to sit closer for warmth while simultaneously breathing thicker air. Researchers studying ancient hearths have found evidence that smoke exposure was likely common in prehistoric shelters, especially in closed caves or low structures with limited ventilation. During prolonged rain, this problem intensified because dry fuel reserves became increasingly rare. A fire that once offered comfort could become an exhausting source of irritation. Eyes burned. Throats dried from smoke despite the wet environment outside. Ash mixed with moisture and clung to skin, hides, and sleeping materials. Yet abandoning the fire was impossible because cold spread quickly once heat disappeared. Smoke also changed the atmosphere inside shelters emotionally as well as physically. Endless rain already reduced visibility and daylight outdoors. Inside caves or temporary structures, dim, smoky firelight created an environment where nights felt longer and heavier. Shadows shifted across stone walls or damp animal hides. Air became dense with the smell of wet wood and ash. Anthropologists often emphasize how central shared fire space was to human social life across prehistory. Fire provided warmth, light, cooking, conversation, and psychological reassurance against darkness outside. During endless rain, that reassuring center became unstable. People may have spent long hours protecting weak flames while listening to storms continuing beyond shelter walls. The effort required simply to maintain basic warmth could dominate entire evenings. Sleeping conditions worsened steadily under these circumstances. Ground exposed to continuous moisture loses insulating ability quickly. Animal hides placed over wet earth eventually absorbed dampness themselves. Grass bedding compacted beneath repeated use and trapped cold moisture close to the body. Even when humans slept close together for warmth, the environment continued pulling heat away through stone, mud, and wet air. Modern studies of exposure show that prolonged damp cold exhausts the body gradually because maintaining temperature requires constant energy. Early humans likely experienced this exhaustion directly during long storms. They may not have fully understood the biology involved, but they understood the feeling, waking tired after sleep, shivering beside weak firelight, struggling to dry materials that never completely dried. Children and older adults were especially vulnerable in these conditions. Endless rain, therefore, transformed nights into periods of survival rather than recovery. Importantly, the danger often accumulated quietly. Humans can endure cold and discomfort for short periods, surprisingly well. The greater threat came from repetition. One damp night became several. Smoke exposure continued daily. Fuel quality worsened slowly. Exhaustion built without dramatic warning. This gradual deterioration may explain why prolonged rainfall felt psychologically heavy, even before major flooding or starvation occurred. Early humans were not simply enduring storms, they were living inside environments where rest itself became unreliable, and when sleep no longer restored strength properly, every task the following day demanded more effort than the day before. During endless rain, weakness did not always arrive suddenly. Sometimes it entered the body one cold night at a time. During endless rain, carrying fire may have become almost as important as carrying food. For early humans, fire was never guaranteed. Creating new flames from scratch required dry material, time, skill, and favorable conditions that prolonged storms rarely provided. Because of this, many prehistoric groups likely treated existing embers as something precious and fragile during migration. Archaeological evidence suggests humans learned not only how to create fire, but how to preserve it across movement and changing weather. In wet environments, this ability may have determined whether a group remained warm through the next night or faced dangerous cold in complete darkness. Endless rain transformed fire from a temporary tool into something closer to a living responsibility. Researchers studying traditional fire-carrying practices among later hunter-gatherer societies have documented methods of transporting slow-burning material over long distances. Although evidence from deep prehistory is limited, archaeologists believe similar strategies may have existed far earlier because preserving embers was often more reliable than repeatedly reigniting fires under difficult environmental conditions. Early humans may have wrapped glowing material inside bark, carried insulated bundles of ash, or used partially burned wood, capable of smoldering slowly for hours. Endless rain increased the importance of these techniques because dry tinder became scarce. Once camps were abandoned and movement began through soaked terrain, a single protected ember could save enormous effort later. Yet protecting fire during migration was physically difficult. Rain entered nearly everything. Wind weakened, exposed heat quickly. Mud slowed travel and exhausted the body. Groups moving through flooded valleys or wet forests had to balance many survival tasks at once, carrying tools, protecting children, monitoring terrain, searching for shelter, and preserving food. Fire added another fragile burden requiring constant attention. Someone likely needed to monitor the ember continuously, adjusting coverings, protecting it from sudden rainfall, and ensuring enough oxygen remained for slow combustion without allowing the material to ignite too rapidly. Endless rain meant even small mistakes could extinguish hours or days of preserved heat. There may also have been social importance attached to this responsibility. Anthropologists widely believe cooperation was central to prehistoric survival because no single individual could manage every environmental challenge alone. Carrying fire during migration may therefore have become a shared duty reflecting trust inside the group. The ember represented future warmth, cooked food, protection, and light. Losing it affected everyone. In harsh weather, preserving fire was not merely technical skill, it was collective survival made visible in a small glowing core protected against the surrounding storm. Endless rain may have intensified awareness of how fragile that protection truly was. The psychological effect of carrying embers through darkness and wet landscapes was likely significant as well. Imagine moving across cold ground while hearing rain strike leaves and stone continuously around you. Most of the world beyond immediate reach remains hidden by weather and fading light. Inside a wrapped container, or beneath layers of ash, however, a small source of heat still survives. For early humans, this may have represented more than practical warmth. Fire created continuity between shelters. It allowed one camp's survival to continue into the next place, rather than beginning again from nothing each time movement became necessary. During endless rain, Continuity mattered deeply because so much else in the environment had become unstable. What makes this especially revealing is how human survival often depended on protecting small things carefully over long periods. Endless rain did not always defeat people through dramatic catastrophe. Sometimes danger appeared through exhaustion, failed routines, and the gradual disappearance of manageable conditions. Carrying embers was a response to that reality. It reflected an understanding that survival could depend on preserving fragile stability while moving through uncertainty. The ember itself was small, quiet, and easily extinguished. Yet, inside prehistoric storms, it may have carried the weight of an entire group's future night. During stable seasons, small rivers and streams often helped early humans survive. They provided fresh water, attracted animals, supported edible plants, and created natural pathways through forests and valleys. Archaeological evidence from many prehistoric sites shows that humans repeatedly settled near water because life gathered there. But during endless rain, these same rivers could transform into dangerous barriers with surprising speed. Water that once guided movement suddenly blocked it. A shallow crossing remembered through years of travel could become impossible overnight. Endless rain changed not only the size of rivers, but the relationship humans had with the land around them. The transformation often began quietly. Continuous rainfall saturated the soil surrounding streams until water could no longer drain efficiently into the ground. Small channels widened outward. Riverbanks softened and collapsed. Water currents strengthened beneath surfaces that still appeared familiar from a distance. Early humans moving through these environments may have recognized the danger slowly, because rivers often changed shape before they visibly overflowed. A crossing that felt stable yesterday might now hide deeper currents beneath muddy water. Endless rain created uncertainty because the landscape no longer behaved according to remembered patterns. Anthropologists studying traditional hunter-gatherer mobility note that humans rely heavily on repeated environmental knowledge. Rivers became frightening precisely because familiar knowledge stopped working reliably. Crossing water during prolonged storms also carried physical risks that modern people rarely face directly. Wet clothing and cold conditions already weakened the body. Falling into fast-moving water could quickly drain body heat or sweep away tools, food, and preserved fire embers. Early humans likely avoided unnecessary river crossings whenever possible during heavy rain, especially when carrying children or traveling in groups with older individuals. Yet avoiding rivers entirely was rarely realistic. Waterways cut across migration routes, separated shelters from food sources, and divided landscapes into isolated sections. Endless rain, therefore, forced difficult decisions about whether crossing remained worth the danger. Researchers studying prehistoric migration patterns suggest humans often preferred routes with predictable access points across rivers and streams. Flooding disrupted these systems immediately. A narrow crossing used for generations could disappear beneath widened water channels. Stones that normally provided footing became invisible under muddy current. Even shallow rivers gained dangerous force when rainfall continued for many days. Humans may have waited near crossings, searching for signs that water levels would drop, only to realize the rain was not ending soon enough. Endless rain transformed time itself into pressure. Delaying movement too long carried its own risks because food, warmth, and shelter remained uncertain elsewhere. Rivers also created psychological barriers during storms. Water moving rapidly through dark weather produced constant sound, reducing the ability to hear approaching animals or other dangers nearby. Mist rising from swollen rivers blurred visibility further. At night, larger currents may have felt especially threatening because their movement remained mostly invisible beyond firelight. Early humans lived close to the sensory reality of nature. They understood danger through direct experience rather than abstraction. A river growing louder each day was not merely scenery changing. It was a warning that the environment itself was becoming less controllable. Some archaeological evidence suggests humans adapted by seeking higher terrain and more stable movement corridors during periods of environmental instability. Yet rerouting around rivers required additional energy and knowledge of unfamiliar paths. Endless rain, therefore, did something subtle but powerful. It fragmented the landscape. Places that once connected easily became separated by moving water and unstable ground. Travel slowed, routes narrowed, safe options disappeared gradually. What had once been a living source of survival became an obstacle, demanding caution at every step. And for humans already exhausted by cold, hunger, and uncertainty, even a small river could begin to feel larger than the storm itself. As endless rain continued reshaping rivers and forests, movement itself became increasingly uncertain for early humans. Paths that once connected hunting grounds, shelters, and water sources slowly disappeared beneath mud, flowing water, and collapsed terrain. In stable seasons, prehistoric humans relied heavily on repeated travel through familiar landscapes, memory-guided movement. A certain ridge led towards safer ground. A narrow crossing allowed passage across a stream. Animal trails cut through dense forest in predictable ways. Endless rain disrupted these remembered systems piece by piece until even experienced travelers could no longer fully trust the land beneath them. Dangerous crossings became one of the clearest examples of this instability. A stream that normally reached only ankle depth could suddenly carry enough force to knock a person sideways. Mud, hidden beneath shallow water, created unstable footing. Stones once used for crossing became slick or invisible under rising current. Early humans moving in groups faced additional difficulty because safe movement depended on the pace of the weakest members as much as the strongest. Children, older adults, and exhausted individuals slowed travel naturally, especially through cold, wet environments. Endless rain therefore transformed every crossing into a careful calculation between urgency and risk. Crossing too quickly invited injury or loss. Waiting too long threatened food access, shelter opportunities, and body warmth elsewhere. Anthropologists, studying mobile hunter-gatherer societies, often emphasize how deeply environmental familiarity supports safe travel. Humans remember landscapes not only visually, but physically. Certain routes become trusted through repetition across seasons and generations. During prolonged rainfall, however, the body's memory of movement stopped matching reality. Ground collapsed where it once felt stable. Dense vegetation concealed flooded depressions. Fallen trees blocked known paths. Water redirected movement into unfamiliar terrain where danger was harder to predict. Endless rain therefore created something psychologically exhausting, uncertainty inside places that once felt known. A hunter following a remembered route might suddenly encounter impassable water or unstable earth without warning. This erosion of trust in the landscape itself likely increased stress throughout migration. Rain also affected visibility in ways that complicated navigation further. Thick cloud cover darkened daylight for extended periods. Mist gathered near rivers and valleys. Wet forests absorbed light beneath heavy canopies, making distance difficult to judge. Sound changed too. Continuous rainfall masked footsteps, flowing water, and animal movement beneath constant noise. Humans who depended on environmental awareness suddenly possessed less reliable sensory information. Researchers studying prehistoric survival often note how closely human cognition evolved alongside pattern recognition in nature. Endless rain interfered with those patterns continuously. Familiar orientation points disappeared or became harder to interpret accurately. Some prehistoric groups may have responded by moving more slowly and cautiously, staying closer to elevated terrain where visibility and drainage improved. Yet slower movement carried its own dangers because food reserves and physical energy were already limited. Lost pathways created another subtle problem. Migration routes were not random wandering. They connected remembered resources: caves, dry ridges, animal movement corridors, reliable crossing points, and seasonal food locations. When heavy rain erased portions of these routes, humans risked becoming isolated from critical knowledge embedded within the landscape. A blocked valley or flooded river could force an entire group into territory they understood less well. In prehistoric environments, unfamiliarity itself carried danger because survival depended on accumulated observation over time. Endless rain, therefore, weakened one of humanity's greatest advantages, the ability to predict the environment through memory. Yet, humans continued adapting despite this instability. They searched for alternative crossings. They followed elevated ridges. They watched animals for clues about safer movement. Survival became less about following established paths perfectly and more about remaining flexible when those paths vanished. During endless rain, the world did not simply become wetter. It became harder to read. And for humans whose lives depended on reading the land correctly, that uncertainty could feel as dangerous as the storm itself. As rivers widened and valleys filled with cold water, early humans may have begun looking upward more often. During endless rain, higher ground slowly changed from difficult terrain into something increasingly valuable. Elevated ridges, rocky slopes, and dry rises in the landscape offered one critical advantage that lowlands could no longer guarantee: separation from moving water. In prehistoric environments, even small increases in elevation could dramatically change survival conditions. Ground remained firmer, flooding arrived more slowly, shelters stayed drier for longer periods. Endless rain did not stop on high ground, but the land itself responded differently there. Archaeological evidence from various prehistoric regions suggests humans repeatedly used elevated terrain during periods of environmental instability, especially when nearby valleys became unreliable or dangerous. The value of higher ground began with drainage. Water naturally collected in low areas first. Valleys trapped runoff. Riverbanks softened and expanded outward. Flat terrain absorbed moisture until movement became exhausting. Elevated surfaces, however, often shed water more efficiently. Rain still soaked the earth, but standing pools formed less easily. Early humans likely recognized these differences through direct experience. A single night spent on slightly raised terrain may have meant waking less cold, less wet, and more capable of moving the following day. Endless rain turned these small physical advantages into important survival decisions. Higher ground also improved visibility. In flooded landscapes where pathways disappeared and forests darkened beneath heavy weather, seeing farther became valuable. From elevated ridges or rocky slopes, humans could monitor rivers, animal movement, approaching storms, and safer travel routes more clearly. Anthropologists studying prehistoric mobility often note how closely human survival depended on environmental awareness. Endless rain reduced that awareness by narrowing sightlines and masking sound. High ground partially restored some of that lost perspective. It allowed groups to observe the changing landscape instead of remaining trapped within it. Yet this shift toward elevation carried trade-offs as well. Higher terrain was rarely comfortable. Wind exposure increased heat loss, especially when clothing and bedding were already damp. Food sources could become less predictable farther from rivers and fertile valleys. Climbing required physical strength that exhausted groups struggled to spare. Endless rain forced humans into difficult compromises where no option solved every problem at once. A dry ridge might offer safety from flooding while increasing exposure to cold wind at night. A rocky slope could preserve footing, but reduce access to fresh water or edible plants nearby. Survival became a continuous balancing of risks rather than a search for perfect conditions. There may also have been emotional meaning attached to higher ground during prolonged storms. In a world where familiar lowlands slowly disappeared beneath water and mud, elevated terrain offered a rare sense of stability. Stone ridges remained visible, while valleys blurred beneath rain and mist. Some landscapes that once felt central to survival became unreachable or dangerous. Humans adapting to endless rain may therefore have experienced a quiet reversal in how they valued the environment. Places previously considered difficult or less desirable gradually became protective instead. This flexibility was one of humanity's greatest strengths across prehistory. Researchers studying human adaptation often emphasize that survival depended less on physical dominance than on behavioral adjustment. Early humans changed movement patterns, shelter choices, and resource strategies as environments shifted around them. Endless rain revealed this adaptability clearly. Humans learned to notice where water moved, where ground remained stable, and where temporary safety could still exist. Higher ground did not remove uncertainty from their lives. Rain still fell, cold still entered the body, hunger still followed failed hunts and difficult travel, but elevation created breathing space inside unstable conditions. It offered time, and during endless storms, time itself may have been one of the most valuable resources early humans possessed. Sometimes survival depended not on escaping the rain completely, but on finding a place where the water arrived just slowly enough for humans to endure another night. Endless rain did not only pressure the body of early humans, it also pressured the fragile balance inside the small groups they depended on for survival. Prehistoric life was deeply social. Humans survived harsh environments not because individuals were always strong alone, but because cooperation allowed food, protection, knowledge, and labor to be shared across the group. Anthropologists widely believe that human social bonds became one of the species' greatest evolutionary advantages, yet cooperation itself requires energy, patience, and emotional stability. During long storms, all three became harder to maintain. Endless rain created conditions where physical exhaustion slowly turned into social tension. Much of this tension likely emerged quietly rather than through open conflict. Small human groups living through prolonged rain faced constant discomfort together. Clothing and bedding remained damp, food became less predictable, movement required greater effort. Fires demanded continuous attention, sleep restored less energy than before. Modern psychological research shows that stress, uncertainty, and physical exhaustion often reduce emotional tolerance, even in stable societies with abundant resources. Early humans living directly inside dangerous environments would almost certainly have experienced similar pressures, even if they understood them differently. A person who failed to gather dry wood, slowed movement, or made poor decisions during migration could affect the survival chances of everyone nearby. Endless rain therefore increased the emotional weight attached to ordinary actions. Space inside shelters may also have intensified strain. During severe weather, groups often stayed physically closer together for warmth and protection. Caves, rock overhangs, or temporary shelters limited personal space naturally. Smoke from wet fires filled enclosed areas. Darkness arrived early beneath thick storm clouds. Outside movement became difficult or dangerous. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer behavior note that mobility itself often helps reduce social tension because people can spread out, separate temporarily, or engage in different daily tasks across open landscapes. Endless rain restricted that flexibility. Humans spent longer periods crowded near weak firelight while listening to storms continue beyond shelter walls. Small irritations may have accumulated slowly under these conditions. Yet prehistoric humans also depended on emotional restraint in ways modern societies sometimes overlook. Open conflict inside small survival groups carried enormous risk. Injuries, separation, or broken cooperation could become deadly during environmental instability. Endless rain, therefore, may have encouraged quieter forms of tension rather than dramatic confrontation. Silence itself could carry meaning. Withdrawal, reduced conversation, hesitation during decision-making, or subtle disagreements about movement and resources may have shaped group dynamics more than visible violence. Researchers studying traditional small-scale societies often observe that survival environments reward social cohesion because mutual dependence remains obvious to everyone involved. During long storms, this mutual dependence became unavoidable. The group needed shared labor to gather fuel, protect fire, monitor changing water levels, care for vulnerable members, and locate safer shelter. Endless rain intensified awareness that no individual could endure alone for long. Decision-making likely became especially difficult during uncertain weather. Should the group remain near a weakening shelter or move toward unfamiliar terrain? Should precious energy be spent searching farther for food? Should a dangerous river crossing be attempted before water rises higher? Prehistoric humans had no guarantee that any choice was correct. Stress increases when outcomes remain uncertain, even after careful effort. Endless rain created exactly this kind of uncertainty repeatedly. Older members may have offered remembered knowledge from previous harsh seasons, while younger individuals carried the physical strength required for movement. Balancing these different forms of value inside the group required trust. What makes this especially important is that human cooperation itself may have been tested and strengthened by environments like these across prehistory. Endless rain exposed weakness, exhaustion, and fear, but it also revealed how deeply survival depended on staying connected despite those pressures. The storm outside the shelter was dangerous, but the quiet strain building between tired human beings sitting beside fading firelight may have been another kind of danger entirely, and both had to be endured together if the group hoped to survive until the rain finally ended. During endless rain, survival depended less on dramatic acts of strength and more on small, repeated forms of cooperation that often happened quietly. Early humans living in small groups could not afford complete independence from one another. Food had to be shared when hunts failed. Fire needed protection through the night. Children, injured individuals, and older adults required care even when everyone was already exhausted. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies frequently emphasize that human survival evolved around cooperation because environmental uncertainty made individual success unreliable. Endless rain intensified this reality. A single successful hunt or dry shelter rarely belonged to one person alone. Under prolonged storms, survival became collective, almost by necessity. Food sharing may have carried especially heavy importance during long periods of rain. Hunting conditions grew unstable as animal movement patterns shifted and tracking became more difficult in wet terrain. Some days likely ended with little or no food despite hours of effort. In small groups, this unpredictability meant that one person's success on a different day might later sustain others when conditions reversed. Researchers studying prehistoric social behavior often suggest that food sharing reduced risk across the group over time. Endless rain made this system more valuable because environmental instability affected everyone simultaneously. A hunter returning with food during severe weather may not have been seen simply as personally successful. The meal represented temporary relief for the entire group against worsening uncertainty, yet sharing under difficult conditions also required restraint. Hunger changes human behavior. Modern research consistently shows that physical exhaustion and food scarcity affect emotional control, patience, and decision-making. Early humans certainly experienced these pressures directly. Endless rain prolonged them. People slept poorly, traveled through difficult terrain, and spent energy gathering wet fuel or searching for safer shelter. Under these circumstances, even maintaining calm cooperation demanded effort. Anthropologists often note that small-scale societies survive partly through social expectations that discourage selfish behavior because long-term survival depends on mutual trust. During endless storms, this trust may have been tested repeatedly. Humans needed to believe that resources shared today would eventually be balanced through future cooperation if the group endured together long enough. Much of this cooperation probably happened without constant discussion. Silence itself may have been part of survival. A person adjusted wet hides closer to the fire without being asked. Someone gathered additional branches, while others cared for children or monitored water levels nearby. During long storms, energy conservation mattered. Endless conversation or conflict wasted emotional strength, already weakened by cold and uncertainty. Researchers observing modern hunter-gatherer groups often describe forms of labor coordination that rely heavily on observation and familiarity, rather than formal instruction. Early humans living through endless rain likely depended on similar patterns. People learned the needs of the group through repeated experience. Over time, cooperation became woven into ordinary movement and routine. Exhaustion shaped all of this quietly. Endless rain rarely destroyed survival in a single moment. Instead, weakness accumulated slowly across many days. Muscles remained tense from cold. Smoke irritated lungs and eyes nightly. Sleep restored less energy than before. Walking through wet terrain demanded constant physical adjustment. Humans enduring these conditions together may have become deeply aware of one another's fatigue. A slower pace, quieter voice, or hesitation during travel carried meaning inside small groups where survival depended on careful observation of others. Cooperation, therefore, included recognizing limits before they became dangerous. This may be one reason humans became such socially attentive creatures across evolutionary history. Environmental hardship rewarded sensitivity to the condition of nearby people. Endless rain revealed how fragile survival became when collective effort weakened. But it also revealed something else. Human groups could endure remarkable instability when individuals continued sharing labor, food, warmth, and attention, even while exhausted themselves. The cooperation was not always emotional or dramatic. Often it was quiet, repetitive, and practical. A hand protecting weak firelight from wind. Food divided carefully in dim shelter. Someone remaining awake slightly longer while others slept. During endless rain, survival may have depended less on extraordinary heroism than on these nearly invisible acts repeated night after night beside the sound of water outside. During endless rain, being alone may have become one of the most dangerous conditions an early human could face. Modern people often associate solitude with peace, privacy, or independence. But in prehistoric environments, shaped by cold, darkness, hunger, and unstable weather, survival depended heavily on remaining connected to others. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies widely agree that humans evolved as deeply social beings because cooperation increased the chances of enduring environmental hardship. Endless rain revealed this dependence clearly. A single person exposed to prolonged storms faced dangers that small groups could at least partially reduce together. Loneliness in prehistory was not only emotional isolation, it was physical vulnerability. One of the simplest reasons isolation became dangerous involved labor itself. Survival during long storms required many tasks happening continuously: gathering fuel, protecting fire, watching for rising water, searching for food, maintaining shelter, caring for children, and monitoring movement routes. A group could divide these responsibilities across several people. Someone alone could not. Endless rain exhausted the body gradually, meaning every task consumed more energy over time. A solitary person gathering wet wood still needed to protect sleeping space afterward. A failed hunt could not be balanced through shared food. Injury or illness became far more dangerous without nearby assistance. Researchers studying prehistoric life often emphasize that cooperation functioned as a buffer against uncertainty. Isolation removed that buffer completely. Fire also became harder to maintain alone. During prolonged rain, preserving embers required constant attention. Wet fuel burned poorly. Wind and moisture threatened flames continuously. In groups, people could alternate responsibilities, allowing brief periods of rest while others watched the fire. Someone alone faced uninterrupted responsibility. Sleep itself became risky because fire could weaken or die completely during the night. Endless rain transformed fatigue into cumulative danger. The more exhausted a person became, the harder it grew to perform the very tasks needed to survive another day. Human beings are biologically affected by social isolation as well. Modern psychological research consistently shows that loneliness increases stress responses and weakens emotional resilience, especially during threatening conditions. Early humans likely experienced similar effects, even without modern language for describing them. Endless rain already reduced sensory comfort. Days became darker. Familiar animal sounds disappeared. Visibility narrowed beneath storms. A solitary individual moving through such environments may have experienced heightened fear because no shared awareness existed to confirm danger, offer reassurance, or assist with decisions. In groups, uncertainty could at least be distributed across multiple minds observing the environment together. Alone, every judgment carried greater weight and greater risk of error. There is also evidence suggesting prehistoric humans relied heavily on collective memory. Knowledge about safe shelters, migration routes, edible plants, dangerous terrain, and seasonal patterns was likely shared socially across generations. Endless rain disrupted familiar landscapes so severely that adapting often required interpreting subtle environmental clues correctly. Groups possessed broader experience than isolated individuals. Someone traveling alone through flooded valleys or unstable forests may have lacked enough information to recognize safer alternatives before conditions worsened. Loneliness therefore weakened not only physical protection, but access to accumulated knowledge itself. Yet perhaps the deepest danger of isolation during endless storms was psychological. Humans evolved in close proximity to others for immense stretches of evolutionary time. Shared firelight, voices inside shelters, and the presence of nearby bodies during cold nights formed part of normal survival. Endless rain stripped away many comforting patterns already. To endure those conditions entirely alone may have created a profound sense of exposure to the world itself. Darkness felt larger without conversation nearby. Rivers sounded more threatening without others listening too. Even brief silence inside a group differs from silence experienced completely alone in unstable wilderness. Early humans survived not because individuals were fearless, but because fear became more manageable when carried collectively. During endless rain, loneliness removed that collective protection. A solitary human facing cold water, failing fire, and uncertain terrain was not simply one person against the weather. They were a social species separated from the very structure that had allowed humans to survive difficult environments for countless generations before. During endless rain, children may have revealed both the fragility and the resilience of early human survival more clearly than anyone else. In prehistoric environments, young children depended almost entirely on the protection, warmth, and cooperation of the group around them. They could not travel long distances efficiently through mud and cold water. They lost body heat faster than adults. Hunger and illness affected them more severely. Endless rain, therefore, placed enormous pressure on the ability of human groups to care for their youngest members while struggling to survive themselves. Archaeologists and anthropologists studying prehistoric populations widely believe that the long dependency period of human children shaped many social behaviors across evolutionary history. Humans survived partly because groups learned how to protect vulnerable individuals even during environmental hardship. Long storms tested that ability continuously. One of the greatest dangers children faced during prolonged rainfall was cold exposure. Smaller bodies lose heat more quickly, especially in wet environments where clothing and bedding remain damp for many days. Early humans likely relied on body contact heavily to preserve warmth for infants and young children. Sleeping close together inside shelters was not only emotional closeness, it was physical survival. Animal hides, gathered grasses, and carefully positioned sleeping areas may have reduced some heat loss, but endless rain weakened these protections over time. Anthropologists studying traditional cold environment survival often note how essential shared warmth becomes when dry conditions cannot be maintained reliably. For prehistoric children, separation from adult protection during storms may have become extremely dangerous very quickly. Movement created additional challenges. Endless rain forced groups to migrate through unstable terrain, searching for safer shelter, food, or higher ground. Adults could adapt their pace to difficult conditions, but children tired rapidly in mud and cold weather. Some were likely carried for long periods despite the enormous energy cost this placed on caregivers already weakened by exhaustion and limited food. Researchers studying prehistoric mobility suggest that human cooperation evolved partly because raising children required collective effort across extended families or groups. During long storms, this cooperative care may have become even more necessary. Protecting children was not the responsibility of one person alone. The survival of younger members affected the continuity of the entire group. Food scarcity also shaped childhood survival during endless rain. Young children require frequent nourishment, yet prolonged storms disrupted hunting, gathering, and food storage reliability. Archaeological evidence suggests prehistoric humans often shared food broadly within groups rather than distributing it only according to immediate productivity. Endless rain likely reinforced this behavior because children could not contribute equally to dangerous survival labor, yet remained essential to the future of the group. Adults enduring hunger themselves may still have prioritized feeding younger members whenever possible. This pattern reflects something important about human evolution. Unlike many species, humans invest heavily in prolonged childhood development, meaning survival strategies became deeply tied to protecting dependent individuals over long periods. Endless rain exposed how difficult and costly that protection could become. Illness may have presented another quiet danger. Wet conditions increase exposure to cold stress, contaminated water, respiratory irritation from smoke-filled shelters, and parasites thriving in damp environments. Young immune systems are particularly vulnerable under such pressures. Prehistoric humans lacked medicine in the modern sense, yet they likely recognized signs of weakness, fever, or dangerous exhaustion through experience. Care itself became a survival activity. Someone remained near sick children. Someone adjusted firelight through the night. Someone carried extra weight during migration because younger legs could not continue farther. These small acts, repeated across generations, may have helped human groups endure environmental instability despite enormous difficulty. Yet perhaps most striking is that children still learned from these environments even while vulnerable within them. Endless rain shaped memory early. Young humans growing up through severe storms likely observed movement decisions, shelter behavior, fire protection, animal tracking, and social cooperation directly from older members. Survival knowledge passed not through formal instruction alone, but through shared experience inside difficult conditions. In this way, prehistoric children were not only protected by the group during endless rain, they were slowly becoming the future carriers of the knowledge that might help humans survive the next long storm as well. During endless rain, older members of early human groups may have carried something as valuable as food or fire. They carried memory. In prehistoric societies without writing, maps, or recorded history, survival knowledge existed almost entirely inside human minds. Information about migration routes, dangerous terrain, seasonal weather, shelter locations, edible plants, animal behavior, and past environmental hardship could only survive if remembered and shared across generations. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies often emphasize that elders contribute far beyond physical labor because long experience helps groups respond to uncertainty more effectively. Endless rain created exactly the kind of uncertainty where remembered knowledge became deeply important. Older individuals may not always have moved as quickly through flooded landscapes, but they may have recognized patterns younger members had never encountered before. A valley flooding unusually early, certain birds disappearing before rivers overflowed, rock shelters remaining dry during previous long storms, changes in animal movement that signaled worsening conditions ahead. Humans evolved in environments where repeated observation across many years mattered greatly. During prolonged rain, memory itself became a survival resource. Endless rain forced decisions without certainty. Groups needed to choose whether to remain near weakening shelters, attempt dangerous crossings, or move toward unfamiliar terrain. Younger adults often carried the physical burden of movement, hunting, and gathering fuel, but older members may have helped shape judgment. Anthropological research suggests that human longevity may partly exist because older individuals improve group survival through accumulated experience and social knowledge. In unstable conditions, this kind of knowledge becomes especially valuable because direct observation alone may not reveal long-term environmental patterns quickly enough. Someone who remembered previous seasons of severe flooding could warn against trusting low ground too long. Someone familiar with distant rock shelters might guide migration towards safer terrain before rivers became impassable. Endless rain rewarded groups capable of combining strength with memory, yet older adults also faced enormous vulnerability during long storms. Cold conditions affected aging bodies more severely. Movement through mud, steep terrain, and heavy rain demanded physical endurance that became harder to maintain with age. Endless rain, therefore, created a difficult balance inside human groups. Elders possessed valuable knowledge, while simultaneously requiring additional support during migration and exposure. This tension reveals something important about human social evolution. Prehistoric survival often depended on protecting individuals whose immediate physical productivity may have declined, but whose experience still strengthened the group's chances of enduring environmental instability. In this way, survival was not based only on speed or strength alone. It depended on preserving knowledge across generations. There may also have been emotional comfort associated with experienced individuals during endless storms. Modern psychological studies show that humans often look toward calm, familiar figures during uncertain conditions. Early humans likely behaved similarly. In environments where rivers changed course, food became unpredictable, and darkness felt endless beneath storm clouds. The presence of someone who had endured difficult seasons before may have reduced panic within the group. Confidence itself affects decision-making. Endless rain created fear partly because it disrupted predictability. Memory helped restore some sense that the world, though dangerous, had patterns humans could still recognize. Importantly, Much of this survival knowledge was probably transmitted quietly through daily life, rather than formal teaching. Children observed how elders judged weather, selected sleeping areas, monitored rivers, and responded to shifting animal movement. Around weak firelight inside shelters, stories or repeated warnings may have carried practical information shaped by generations of experience. Endless rain, therefore, did more than test survival physically. It tested whether knowledge could continue moving successfully from one generation into the next, despite instability. What makes this especially meaningful is that human beings survived countless environmental challenges, partly because memory remained social rather than individual. One person's experience became shared protection for the group. During long storms, older humans may have represented continuity itself. Even while the landscape changed under endless rain, they carried evidence that humans had endured changing worlds before, and sometimes, in unstable conditions, that memory alone may have helped groups continue moving forward through the storm. Endless rain may have taught early humans something deeper than how to find shelter or preserve fire. It may have taught them that survival depended on remaining connected to one another, even when fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty made separation tempting. Across prehistory, humans faced predators, cold, hunger, and environmental instability repeatedly. Yet anthropologists widely believe one of humanity's greatest advantages was not physical strength alone. It was the ability to cooperate across long periods of hardship. Endless rain exposed this truth slowly. The storm weakened individuals day by day, but it also revealed how much protection existed inside collective effort. During prolonged rainfall, no single person controlled enough resources to remain secure independently for long. One person might locate dry fuel, while another remembered safer terrain. Someone carried children during migration, while others searched for food or watched changing rivers. Survival became distributed across many small contributions, rather than concentrated in one strong individual. Archaeological research into prehistoric communities often suggests that humans evolved unusually high levels of social dependence compared to many other species. Human childhood lasts longer. Knowledge accumulates socially across generations. Cooperation allows food and labor to be shared through unstable periods. Endless rain placed pressure on all of these systems simultaneously, forcing groups to rely on one another more visibly than during stable seasons. The storm revealed interdependence not as an abstract idea, but as daily reality. One of the clearest lessons may have involved patience. Endless rain could not be defeated quickly. There was no single action that restored dry ground, stable rivers, or predictable hunting. Humans instead endured through repeated small acts of maintenance and cooperation. Fires were protected together. Food was divided carefully. Movement slowed to keep weaker members from falling behind. Anthropologists studying resilience in small-scale societies often note that long-term survival depends less on constant success and more on preventing complete collapse during difficult periods. Endless rain forced humans into exactly this kind of thinking. Groups survived not because every day improved, but because they preserved enough stability to continue into the next day despite worsening conditions. The storm also may have reshaped emotional understanding inside human groups. Fear behaves differently when experienced collectively. A single person alone in cold darkness may panic more easily because no shared attention exists to balance uncertainty. Inside groups, however, observation, reassurance, and routine distribute emotional pressure across many people. Endless rain created environments where psychological endurance mattered alongside physical survival. Weak firelight, crowded shelters, and long nights filled with the sound of water may have strengthened awareness that human beings calm one another simply through presence. Modern psychological research continues to show that social connection reduces stress responses during threatening conditions. Early humans likely experienced this directly, long before such processes were scientifically understood. There is also something important about how endless rain challenged the illusion of control. Humans could not stop the storms. Rivers rose regardless of fear or effort. Food remained uncertain. Paths disappeared beneath mud and water. Yet even without controlling nature completely, groups still adapted together. They changed routes, shared labor, protected memory, and continued moving through unstable landscapes. This may have shaped one of the oldest lessons in human survival. Resilience often comes not from dominating the environment, but from adjusting collectively inside conditions that cannot be fully controlled. Endless rain, therefore, became more than environmental hardship. It became a teacher of human dependence itself. The storm stripped away comforts and predictable routines until something simpler remained visible beneath them. Humans endured because they stayed near one another despite exhaustion. They carried knowledge together. They protected weakness together. They faced uncertainty together. And perhaps this is part of why modern humans still seek companionship instinctively during fear, grief, illness, and instability. Somewhere deep inside human memory, there may still remain traces of those long storms when survival depended less on escaping the rain and more on refusing to face it alone. When endless rain finally began to weaken, early humans may not have recognized the change immediately. After long periods of gray skies, cold ground, and constant water movement, the environment itself would have felt permanently unstable. A single dry morning meant little. Rivers could still rise again. Wet earth remained dangerous beneath the surface. Animal movement patterns had already changed. Endless rain altered survival slowly, and the return of calmer conditions likely unfolded with the same gradual uncertainty. Prehistoric humans living inside these storms may have learned to distrust quick signs of improvement because survival depended on caution, not optimism alone. The first signs of change were probably subtle. Rainfall became less constant rather than disappearing completely. Breaks between storms lasted slightly longer. Smoke from fires rose more cleanly into calmer air. Ground exposed briefly to sunlight began drying at the surface, while deeper layers remained soaked underneath. Anthropologists studying human adaptation often note how closely prehistoric people observed environmental details because survival depended on recognizing patterns before they became obvious. During the slow ending of long storms, humans may have watched rivers carefully for signs that water levels were stabilizing rather than continuing upward. They listened for returning animal sounds in forests that had felt strangely silent during heavy rain. Small environmental changes carried enormous meaning because they suggested the landscape might eventually become predictable again. Yet recovery after endless rain was not immediate. Flooded valleys remained difficult to cross. Mud slowed movement long after storms weakened. Wet fuel still burned poorly. Food systems disrupted by migration and flooding required time to recover. Endless rain did not simply end and restore the old world instantly. Instead, humans emerged into landscapes altered by prolonged instability. Some familiar routes may have disappeared entirely beneath erosion or collapsed terrain. Animal herds might still occupy distant high ground, rather than returning quickly to previous grazing areas. Shelters abandoned during severe flooding could remain unsafe or unusable. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric climate shifts suggests humans repeatedly adapted to changing environments rather than expecting nature to return perfectly to earlier conditions. The emotional experience of the storm's ending may also have been complicated. Relief likely mixed with caution. Human nervous systems respond strongly to prolonged uncertainty, and endless rain created uncertainty every day. Even quieter nights may not have erased fear immediately. Someone hearing distant water after dark might still expect rising floods again. Groups moving back toward lower terrain may have hesitated before trusting rivers and valleys that recently became dangerous. Modern psychological research shows that humans often remain alert after extended exposure to stressful conditions. Early humans likely experienced similar lingering vigilance even without modern language for describing trauma or anxiety. Recovery, therefore, involved more than environmental change alone. The body and mind both needed time to recognize safety, returning gradually. There may also have been moments of rediscovery during this period. Familiar pathways reappeared beneath drying ground. Certain plants began recovering. Animals slowly returned to old migration corridors. Fire became easier to maintain as fuel dried more reliably. These changes probably restored confidence slowly because they reintroduced patterns humans understood from previous seasons. Endless rain had disrupted predictability itself. The return of recognizable rhythms, therefore, mattered deeply. Anthropologists often describe humans as pattern-seeking creatures, shaped by environments where survival depended on noticing regularity in nature. Calm after prolonged storms restored some of that regularity, yet the storm likely changed people permanently as well. Groups surviving endless rain carried new memory into future decisions. Certain valleys may have become associated with danger after severe flooding. Elevated ridges, once ignored, might now be remembered as safer ground during unstable weather. Knowledge gained through hardship rarely disappears completely. During the first quieter days after endless rain, early humans were not simply returning to old lives unchanged. They were entering a familiar world that now carried the memory of how quickly stability could vanish beneath falling water. When early humans finally returned toward places abandoned during endless rain, they may have discovered that the landscape no longer matched their memory of it. Flooding changes environments slowly while the storm continues, but its effects become fully visible only afterward. Rivers cut new paths through softened ground. Trees collapse into valleys. Animal trails disappear beneath layers of mud and debris. Areas once used for shelter may become unstable or permanently wetter than before. Endless rain did not simply interrupt prehistoric life temporarily. It reshaped the physical world humans depended on for orientation, movement, and survival. Returning after the floods, therefore, meant learning familiar places all over again. One of the first changes humans likely noticed involved the ground itself. Soil saturated for long periods behaves differently even after rainfall weakens. Mud dries unevenly. Some surfaces harden while deeper layers remain unstable beneath them. Footing that once felt secure could collapse unexpectedly under weight. Archaeologists studying ancient floodplains often observe how repeated water movement alters terrain patterns over surprisingly short periods of time. Small streams widen, riverbanks erode, stones shift position. Endless rain transformed landscapes not through one dramatic event alone, but through continuous pressure applied day after day. Humans returning to old pathways may have found routes partially erased or redirected entirely. This loss of environmental familiarity mattered deeply because prehistoric survival depended heavily on remembered terrain. Food sources may also have changed significantly after prolonged flooding. Certain plants recovered slowly or disappeared from heavily damaged ground altogether. Animal migration patterns remained altered even after water levels dropped because herds had already adapted to new grazing areas during the storms. Early humans likely needed time to rediscover where reliable hunting and gathering could happen safely again. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer adaptation often emphasize how closely human movement follows ecological stability. Endless rain disrupted that stability across entire regions. Returning home, if such a word can even apply to highly mobile prehistoric groups, did not guarantee immediate recovery of familiar resources. Shelter sites carried new uncertainty as well. Caves and rock overhangs may have remained valuable, but lower campsites near rivers or wetlands could now seem dangerous after recent flooding experience. Humans surviving endless rain probably remembered where water rose fastest, where mud trapped movement, and where fires became impossible to maintain. These memories likely influenced future settlement choices long after the storms ended. Researchers studying human risk behavior often note that powerful environmental experiences reshape decision-making permanently. A valley associated with severe flooding may no longer feel safe, even during calmer seasons. Endless rain, therefore, altered not only the land itself, but the emotional map humans carried inside memory. There may also have been moments of strange quiet after the storms. Forests damaged by prolonged water exposure sometimes become temporarily still. Animal sounds return gradually rather than all at once. Rivers continue moving heavily even after rainfall decreases. Early humans walking through recovering landscapes may have sensed that the world remained unsettled despite improving weather. Endless rain had interrupted familiar rhythms for so long that normal conditions no longer felt entirely trustworthy. Modern psychological studies show that humans often become more alert to environmental danger after prolonged exposure to instability. Prehistoric humans likely developed similar caution through direct experience. Yet returning to changed landscapes also revealed something important about human adaptability. People adjusted. They found new routes where old ones disappeared. They learned which ground remained safe after flooding. They rebuilt patterns of movement around altered rivers and recovering ecosystems. Archaeological evidence across human history repeatedly shows this ability to adapt to environmental change rather than waiting for perfect restoration of previous conditions. Endless rain forced humans to accept that landscapes were never completely permanent. Rivers moved. Forests changed. Familiar places could become dangerous unexpectedly. But survival did not depend on preserving the old world unchanged. It depended on learning how to continue living inside a world that kept changing around them. And perhaps that lesson remained with humans long after the final floodwaters pulled slowly back into the earth. Long after endless rain ended, the storms may have continued living inside human memory. Early humans did not record history through writing for most of prehistory. Knowledge survived through observation, repeated behavior, shared stories, and emotional memory passed quietly between generations. Anthropologists studying oral cultures often emphasize that important environmental events become woven into collective understanding over time. Dangerous floods, severe droughts, unusual cold, and long storms leave traces not only on landscapes, but on human behavior itself. Endless rain may therefore have shaped future generations long after the water disappeared from the ground. Children who survived prolonged storms grew into adults carrying detailed memory of unstable rivers, failing fires, flooded valleys, and difficult migrations. These memories likely influenced where future shelters were built, which routes were trusted during changing weather, and how quickly groups responded to environmental warning signs. A younger generation, observing older survivors, would have inherited not just stories, but patterns of caution. Certain lowlands may have become associated with danger during heavy rainfall. Elevated ridges, once considered inconvenient, could later be treated as important refuge areas because previous generations remembered surviving there. Archaeological evidence across human history repeatedly shows that environmental experience shapes long-term settlement behavior. Endless rain likely became part of that accumulated survival knowledge. Some researchers studying ancient flood traditions suggest that memories of severe environmental events can survive surprisingly long inside oral cultures, especially when those events threaten collective survival. While prehistoric humans may not have preserved exact factual accounts over centuries in the modern historical sense, repeated warnings and remembered patterns likely continued influencing group decisions. Someone teaching younger members where not to camp during heavy rain may have been transmitting lessons originally learned generations earlier during major storms. Endless rain therefore became more than temporary weather. It became inherited caution, embedded inside human movement and behavior. Emotional memory probably played a role as well. Modern neuroscience shows that humans remember threatening or emotionally intense experiences differently from ordinary events. Fear sharpens attention. Repeated danger reinforces learning. Early humans living through prolonged storms likely developed strong sensory associations connected to rising rivers, darkened skies, constant dampness, or unusual animal movement. These associations may have persisted throughout life, shaping future reactions whenever similar conditions appeared again. Endless rain taught humans not only what happened during floods, but what signs often came before them. Over time, environmental awareness became cultural memory. There is also evidence that storytelling itself may have strengthened human survival by preserving practical information emotionally rather than abstractly. Around firelight after the storms ended, older members may have described difficult crossings, collapsing shelters, vanished animal herds, or dangerous valleys overtaken by water. Younger listeners hearing these memories would not simply learn facts. They would absorb emotional understanding about risk, caution, cooperation, and adaptation. Anthropologists often note that stories in oral societies frequently carry survival knowledge hidden inside remembered experience. Endless rain may have entered human storytelling not because people wanted to dwell on suffering, but because remembering hardship improved future survival. Yet memory changes over generations. Details soften. Events merge with symbolism, fear, or spiritual interpretation. Some ancient flood myths found across later human civilizations may preserve distant echoes of real environmental disasters experienced repeatedly throughout prehistory, though scholars remain cautious about making direct claims without evidence. What matters more is the broader pattern. Humans remember instability. Landscapes change, but memory helps future generations respond more quickly when familiar danger returns. Endless rain, therefore, shaped something larger than one season of hardship. It strengthened the human habit of carrying environmental lessons forward through social connection. Even today, people inherit fears, precautions, and behaviors shaped partly by experiences they never personally witnessed. Somewhere deep in human history, long storms may have helped teach our species that survival depends not only on enduring danger once, but on remembering it carefully enough to recognize its return. And perhaps this is why humans still pause instinctively when rivers rise too quickly or skies remain dark for too many days in a row. Memory travels farther through generations than water ever could. Endless rain reveals something important about early humans that is easy to overlook today. Survival was rarely dramatic in the way modern stories often imagine it. Most prehistoric people did not overcome nature through sudden victories or complete control over their environment. Instead, they endured through adaptation, patience, observation, and repeated cooperation under difficult conditions. Archaeologists and anthropologists studying prehistoric life consistently find evidence that humans survived changing climates, not because the world became easier, but because human behavior remained flexible enough to adjust when familiar systems failed. Endless rain exposed this flexibility slowly. The storms weakened the body, disrupted movement, altered food patterns, and changed landscapes people once trusted. Yet humans continued adapting, one decision at a time. One reason this resilience mattered so deeply is that prehistoric environments were never completely stable, even during calmer periods. Rivers shifted seasonally, animal migrations changed over time, temperatures rose and fell across generations. Early humans evolved inside dynamic ecosystems where certainty was always temporary. Endless rain intensified that instability until ordinary survival routines no longer worked reliably. Fires required new protection methods. Travel shifted toward higher ground. Groups shared food more carefully. Knowledge from older generations became more valuable. Humans responded not by refusing change, but by reorganizing themselves around it. Anthropologists often describe adaptability as one of the defining characteristics of human evolution. Prolonged storms demonstrate why. The resilience of early humans was also deeply collective. Modern culture sometimes celebrates survival as individual toughness, but prehistoric life suggests something different. Humans endured environmental hardship because responsibilities were distributed across the group. One person gathered fuel while another protected children. Someone remembered safer terrain. Others monitored water levels or searched for food. Endless rain revealed that resilience often depends less on isolated strength and more on connected systems of cooperation. A group could absorb failure more effectively than a single, exhausted individual alone. This pattern appears repeatedly across human history. Communities survive instability more reliably when labor, knowledge, and emotional support are shared rather than concentrated. Endless rain may have reinforced this lesson long before written civilization existed. There is also something important about how humans responded psychologically to prolonged uncertainty. Endless rain removed predictability from daily life. Familiar routes disappeared. Hunting success became inconsistent. Shelters failed unexpectedly. Yet humans still continued planning for the future, even when conditions remained unstable. They protected embers for the next camp. They carried children across difficult terrain. They preserved memory through stories and repeated behavior. Modern psychological research often links resilience not to the absence of fear, but to the ability to continue functioning despite uncertainty. Early humans likely demonstrated this repeatedly during severe environmental stress. They did not always know when the rain would stop or whether conditions would improve soon. Survival required moving forward without complete reassurance. Endless rain also reveals how closely human beings remain connected to natural systems even now. Modern societies often create the feeling that technology separates people from environmental vulnerability entirely. Yet storms, floods, changing climates, and resource instability still affect human behavior deeply across the world today. Early humans experienced these pressures more directly because fewer barriers existed between the body and the environment. Their survival depended on reading landscapes carefully and adjusting behavior continuously. In many ways, that ancient relationship with uncertainty still exists beneath modern life, even if it is easier to ignore. Perhaps the most meaningful lesson hidden inside these long prehistoric storms is that resilience rarely looks powerful while it is happening. It often appears quiet, repetitive, and ordinary. A fire protected through another wet night, a child carried across unstable ground, a group deciding to keep moving despite exhaustion. Endless rain did not transform humans into fearless beings, immune to suffering. The storms revealed something more realistic and more enduring. Humans survived because they adapted together while remaining vulnerable. They continued searching for dry ground, even after familiar paths disappeared. They preserved memory even when landscapes changed, and they kept building small forms of stability inside a world that could never be made completely safe. Perhaps resilience has always looked like this, not the defeat of uncertainty, but the decision to continue living carefully within it. After endless rain disrupted rivers, shelters, food routes, and familiar routines, early humans still continued trying to rebuild stability. This may seem obvious at first, but it reveals something profound about human behavior across prehistory. Humans repeatedly return to structure after chaos. Even when environments become unpredictable, people continue searching for patterns that make daily life manageable again. Anthropologists studying prehistoric societies often note that humans survive not only through physical adaptation, but through the rebuilding of routine itself. Endless rain shattered ordinary rhythms, fires failed unexpectedly, sleep became unreliable, travel routes disappeared beneath mud and water. Yet once conditions allowed even small opportunities for recovery, humans began reconstructing order from instability almost immediately. One reason this rebuilding mattered so deeply is that human survival depends heavily on predictability. The body conserves energy more effectively when food, shelter, and movement follow recognizable patterns. Endless rain exhausted people partly because it removed this predictability. Every day introduced new uncertainty about water levels, animal movement, dry fuel, and safe shelter. Researchers studying stress responses consistently find that prolonged unpredictability places heavy strain on both physical and psychological systems. Early humans likely experienced this directly, even without scientific language for it. Rebuilding stability after storms, therefore, was not only practical, it helped restore emotional balance and decision-making capacity as well. Small routines may have returned first. A more reliable sleeping arrangement, regular fire maintenance, familiar gathering routes becoming usable again, children playing near shelter without immediate danger from rising water. These details appear minor, yet they represent something important. Human beings organize life through repeated patterns because repetition creates a sense of continuity across uncertain time. Endless rain interrupted continuity. Rebuilding routine helped reconnect daily survival with future expectation. Archaeologists studying early human settlements often observe repeated use of particular locations across long periods, suggesting humans preferred returning to places where environmental stability had previously existed. After severe storms, groups may have searched carefully for signs that such stability could emerge again. Cooperation remained central during this rebuilding process. Endless rain demonstrated how fragile survival became when systems failed simultaneously. Food, warmth, movement, and shelter all depended on collective effort. Once storms weakened, rebuilding likely involved redistributing labor once again toward longer-term stability rather than immediate emergency response. Some individuals searched farther for reliable resources. Others repaired sleeping areas, protected children, or monitored safer pathways reopening through the landscape. Anthropologists frequently describe humans as unusually cooperative planners compared to many species because people invest effort into future conditions beyond immediate survival alone. Endless rain threatened the future repeatedly. Rebuilding represented a refusal to live entirely inside short-term fear. There is also evidence that environmental hardship can strengthen social memory about preparation. Humans surviving prolonged storms may have become more attentive to elevated shelter locations, seasonal river changes, or fuel preservation afterward. Stability rebuilt after chaos was rarely identical to what existed before. Instead, it incorporated lessons learned during instability itself. A group that survived dangerous flooding might choose different camp locations in future wet seasons. People who struggled to maintain fire during endless rain may have become more careful storing dry fuel whenever conditions improved. In this way, rebuilding was not simply restoration, it was adaptation shaped by memory. Perhaps most importantly, endless rain reveals that humans continued rebuilding stability even while understanding it could disappear again. Prehistoric people lived close enough to nature to know that no shelter, route, or food source remained permanent forever. Rivers changed, animals migrated, storms returned, yet humans still invested effort into making life more stable each time conditions allowed it. Modern societies often imagine stability as something fixed and guaranteed, but prehistoric survival suggests a different understanding. Stability may always have been temporary, something humans recreate continuously rather than possess permanently. Endless rain stripped life down to uncertainty for long periods. But once the storms weakened, humans resumed building warmth, routine, cooperation, and memory, again despite knowing the world could shift unpredictably once more. Perhaps this is one of the oldest human instincts of all, not believing chaos will never return, but rebuilding careful forms of order anyway each time the rain finally begins to fade. Endless rain eventually passed, as all storms do. Rivers slowly returned within their banks, ground hardened beneath weak sunlight, smoke rose more cleanly from fires built with drying wood. Animal movement became easier to predict again. Yet the deeper story of those long storms may not be about weather alone. It may be about what humans learned while living inside uncertainty for so long. Early humans could not stop the rain. They could not control rivers, prevent cold, or guarantee safety from one night to the next. Much of prehistoric life unfolded inside conditions that remained unstable despite every effort to create shelter and routine. And yet humans endured, not perfectly, not without fear, exhaustion, loss, or confusion, but they endured long enough for memory itself to continue moving forward through generations. Archaeologists and anthropologists studying prehistoric life often remind us that survival was rarely a single dramatic event. Most humans who ever lived survived through ordinary repetition under difficult circumstances. Endless rain reveals this clearly. A fire protected through another wet night, a child carried across dangerous ground, food shared carefully despite hunger, someone remaining awake slightly longer while others slept. These actions were small when viewed individually, but together they formed the structure that allowed human communities to persist across unstable environments for thousands of years. Perhaps resilience was never built from extraordinary moments alone. Perhaps it emerged from the quiet continuation of care and cooperation, while certainty remained impossible. The storms also reveal something about memory. Humans are one of the few species capable of carrying detailed knowledge far beyond immediate experience. A dangerous flood becomes a warning passed to children. A safe ridge becomes remembered across generations. Fear itself becomes information shaping future decisions. Endless rain, therefore, did not disappear completely when skies cleared. The experience remained inside. Movement patterns, shelter choices, stories, habits, and emotional instincts long afterward. Modern people still react strongly to rising water, dark skies, and prolonged environmental instability. Some of those responses are biological, some are learned culturally, and perhaps some belong to much older layers of human memory shaped slowly across prehistoric time. There is also something humbling about how limited human control remained during these storms. Modern societies often imagine progress as increasing mastery over nature, yet endless rain reminds us that human life has always depended partly on adaptation rather than domination. Early humans survived because they learned to observe carefully, cooperate consistently, and remain flexible when the environment changed unexpectedly. They did not conquer uncertainty completely. They learned how to continue living beside it. In many ways, that challenge still exists now, even if modern life sometimes hides it behind walls, technology, and routine. Weather still changes faster than expected. Landscapes still flood. Stability still disappears more easily than people imagine. Perhaps this is why stories about early humans continue to feel strangely familiar. The environments differ, but the emotional experience of uncertainty remains recognizable across time. Endless rain may also reveal why human connection matters so deeply during unstable periods. Throughout the storms, survival depended repeatedly on shared effort. Warmth was shared, knowledge was shared, responsibility was shared. Fear itself became easier to carry when experienced beside other people, rather than alone. Modern psychological research continues to show that social connection protects human well-being during stress and uncertainty. Prehistoric life demonstrates how ancient that dependence truly is. Humans became resilient not because individuals stopped needing one another, but because cooperation allowed vulnerability itself to be survived collectively. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson hidden beneath those long-forgotten storms. Human beings have never lived in a completely certain world. The rivers always moved eventually. The weather always changed. The future was never fully visible beyond the next valley or the next season. Yet generation after generation, humans still carried fire through the rain. They still rebuilt routines after chaos. They still taught children what they had learned. They still searched for stable ground, while knowing it might not remain stable forever. And somewhere inside that endless effort to continue despite uncertainty, the human story slowly moved forward through the sound of falling rain into a future no one living then could possibly imagine. But perhaps one question still remains quietly beneath it all. If the storms shaped humans for so long, how much of those ancient rains still live silently inside the way we fear, remember, and search for safety today?